and let's go on an adventure together.
Welcome back, my friend, to our next stop on our tour of Tudor London. I will be taking you on a virtual tour of Tudor Westminster to visit the very heart of Tudor monarchy and government. Together, we will stroll down King Street, known in your day as Whitehall, before entering the royal enclave of Westminster, where we will visit the great hall of the old palace and gaze upon the collegiate church of St. Peter in Westminster, which you might better know as Westminster Abbey. So, let us start our journey. Well, here we are, standing at the top of King Street, close to the King's stables, which serve nearby Whitehall Palace. At its centre is the magnificent Eleanor Cross, a monument to Queen Eleanor, beloved wife of Edward I. In my day, this monument is already 200 years old. Built in the late 13th century, it is only one of 12 which marked the resting places of the funeral procession that conveyed the body of Queen Eleanor from the house of Robert de Weston at Hardby in Nottinghamshire, where she died, to her burial place, her tomb in Westminster Abbey. But let's leave that behind, my friend, and begin our walk down King Street. We are heading in a southerly direction. On either side of the wide road there are buildings, on your left with gardens that lead down to the River Thames. Away on your right, you will be aware of the Royal Park of St. James and the open countryside that surrounds it, a favoured hunting ground for the king and court. As we walk along, you will notice tradesmen, merchants, and ordinary folk of London coming and going. Some are headed for the gateway to your left, called the Court Gate. This leads into the Palace of Whitehall. You will see that their carts are laden with goods that will service the royal court, which numbers up to 1,000 people when the king is in residence. But you are not likely to see any noblemen coming and going by this entrance on any ordinary day, for they are most likely to arrive by boat, alighting at the stairs that give entrance on the waterfront side of the palace. However, the most striking feature that lies directly ahead of us is a gateway, which you will know as the Holbein Gate. However, here in the 16th century, it is simply referred to as the Hither Gatehouse or the First Gatehouse. It straddles the road and links the King's Privy Chambers on the left of King Street with the Tiltyard Gallery and the extensive complex on the right. This three-storey tower is built of stone and flint and is arranged in a checkerboard pattern. Each floor has a large central oriel window, adorned on each side with terracotta roundels, and is the height of Italianate Renaissance fashion. Of course, it is in a chamber on the uppermost floor that it is said that Anne Boleyn was married secretly to the king on the 25th of January, 1533. But let's pass underneath one of its side passageways meant for pedestrians, and that way, my friend, we can safely avoid the horses and carts that run underneath its narrow central archway. On the other side of the gate, you will immediately notice a larger turreted building rising up from behind a red brick wall on your right-hand side. Now, this wall separates the road from the palace's leisure complex, and the building you can see is its closed tennis play. It is a striking feature indeed, with towers at each corner, each one topped with a gilded dome that glistens in the morning sunlight. And this is where the king and his male courtiers enjoy playing real tennis, watched by the rest of the court. Meanwhile, to your left is another wall. It's high enough to prevent us from seeing over it, which is a shame, my friend, as beyond lies a fine privy garden with a great fountain at its centre. Perhaps you can hear the sound of tinkling water above the hubbub of King Street. Here the king and queen can take exercise alongside their closest companions and honoured visiting guests. Not too much further down the road, we come to yet another goodly gateway, which once again straddles King Street. This is called King Street Gate. And like the Holbein Gate, it is divided into 3 passages running north to south, a wide centre one for coaches and riders on horseback, and 2 narrower side passages for pedestrians like us. Built during the reign of King Henry VIII, in contrast to the Holbein Gate, which is built in classic Tudor style, you might notice that this one looks very different, for its design was inspired by French architectural style. But like the Holbein Gate though, this also connects one side of the palace with the other on the far side of the road, and it also demarcates the southern boundary of the palace complex. Beyond this gate lies the royal enclave of Westminster. So, let us continue to walk southwards to the bottom of King Street, where yet another gatehouse on your left gives entrance to the outer or Old Palace Yard. In your time, you would be standing at the northeast corner of Parliament Square, when on most ordinary days your senses would be assaulted by the noise and smell of busy traffic, and you will be jostled amongst the throng of tourists. But, my friend, you need to imagine these reminders of a busy 21st century melting away to leave the medieval palace of Westminster and the adjacent abbey dominating a peaceful landscape surrounded by open green spaces, wide thoroughfares and pretty ornamental gardens. In the 16th century, the city of Westminster was, as it remains in your day, the seat of English government and power. And although in your time you can no longer see evidence of it, Westminster Abbey and the Old Palace stood on an island called Thorney Island, with the River Tyburn and one of its tributaries flowing into the Thames on either side of the site. Like many rivers in London that once flowed above ground, these were later diverted underground. Thus, in the 16th century, Westminster was connected to the mainland on the north, the south and west by several bridges, being encircled on 3 sides by open countryside and abutted by the River Thames to the east. Now, let's head under the gatehouse and into Old Palace Yard. The outer yard, which you can see here, is a huge courtyard that runs from the King's Steps by the river on the east to the gateway you have just walked beneath, the so-called Great Gateway on the west. In the centre is a conduit, while the whole area is enclosed by stone, brick and wattle and door buildings along its northern edge, with the magnificent facade of Westminster Palace running along the southern side. As you can see, my friend, these latter buildings are fashioned from white stone, the roofs being pitched and crenulated in parts, chimneys and turrets rising into the sky. As we walk across the courtyard and admire the main north-facing doors, which lead into the Great Hall of the Old Palace, you will see how impressive this building looks from the outside. But wait till I take you indoors, for there is no hall to compare with it in the land. So follow me and let's go inside out of the heat of the day. Even stripped bare, as it is today, be ready to have your breath snatched away by the sheer grandeur of the space and the utter magnificence of one of the largest hammer-beam roofs in England. The Great Hall of Westminster was virtually rebuilt by King Richard II in the late 14th century. At 240 feet long, nearly 70 feet wide, and just under 100 foot tall at the centre apex, the hall dwarfs many of the buildings that surrounds it. In your time, it stands as an integral part of the Houses of Parliament, cast in the shadow of the Elizabeth Tower, affectionately called Big Ben, after the gigantic bell which chimes every quarter of an hour. Despite the loss of much of the old palace by a devastating fire that burnt much of the original medieval palace to the ground in 1834, this grand dam of history stands, even in your 21st century, while the rest of the palace has been remodelled in a Gothic style and forms your modern Houses of Parliament. But look around you. This hall has borne witness to many momentous occasions. And as you walk along its length towards the far end, the high end, remember that great state trials are held here, including that of Sir Thomas More and the 4 men that were accused alongside Anne Boleyn, Mark Smeaton, William Brereton, Francis Weston, and Sir Henry Norris. There were happier times, though. Somewhere near the foot of the steps, at the southern end of the hall, was the position of the dais that Anne sat upon beneath the rich cloth of estate as she presided over her coronation banquet. And as we stand here, with your back to the north doors, look up and to your left to the second window along from the southern end of the hall. In the 16th century, there was a gallery and a window where King Henry VIII was able to look down upon the celebrations below. But as custom dictated, His Grace stayed out of sight during the entire coronation festivities, for this was Anne Boleyn's day alone. Now, since we're speaking of Anne Boleyn, it may be that you would like to follow in her footsteps on the day of her coronation. Such a happy and joyous occasion. I remember it well. The Queen-to-be followed centuries of tradition that day, and on the morning of her coronation, the 1st of June 1533, she walked to the Abbey to be crowned. In fact, if she had followed that tradition to the letter, she would have done so barefoot. It was an act of humility. Leaving Westminster Hall behind her, Anne walked beneath the canopy, the same gold canopy of the Cinque Ports that had been carried over her the day before, when she had progressed from the Tower of London to Westminster, with Jonathan Stokesley and Stephen Gardiner taking up the traditional positions of Bishops of London and Winchester on either side of their Queen. In front of Anne, the newly married Henry Grey, Marquess of Dorset, carried the sceptre of gold, whilst the 21-year-old Earl of Arundel held the sceptre of ivory topped with a dove, which symbolises the Holy Spirit. Finally, immediately in front of Anne came Charles Brandon, carrying the ancient crown of St. Edward. A train of Anne's ladies and gentlewomen, Variously dressed in scarlet and velvet gowns, some furred with ermine, followed on behind. And the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk had the honour of holding the long train of Anne's purple velvet surcoat, while Lord Burr, the Queen's Chamberlain, supported the train in the middle. The procession made its way across the north side of the Abbey precinct and church towards the main west doors, which you may well pass through if you visit the Abbey in your day, as they are used as the main exit. Let us pause here, my friend, outside the west doors, with the twin towers of the Abbey church soaring up above us, and we can admire, arguably, one of the most historic and important buildings in England. Now, the origins of the Abbey are obscure. Nobody knows exactly when this mighty building was founded. However, Edward the Confessor certainly built a magnificent Saxon church upon the site, and William the Conqueror sealed its place in English history by having himself crowned at the Abbey following the conquest of England on Christmas Day in 1066. Subsequently, virtually every English monarch has been anointed and crowned within the Abbey. Of course, until the dissolution, the church was part of a greater Abbey complex. Now, this was first dissolved on the 16th of January 1540. However, monastic life at the Abbey was briefly restored when the Catholic Mary I came to the throne, only for everything to be reversed 1 year after the accession of Her Majesty Elizabeth I, when the abbot and the monks of Westminster Abbey were finally removed. However, even in your day, you may still wander its peaceful cloisters, explore its chapter house, and see the Pyx chamber where the medieval crown jewels were once stored. Yes, Westminster Abbey is a building which is steeped in centuries of English history and has steadfastly borne witness to profound social and religious change. Many notable figures have passed through its doors, and the most important of those now lie buried within the Abbey. These include the founder of the most noble Tudor dynasty, Henry VII, and his wife, Elizabeth of York. They lie in the fabulous Lady Chapel, at rest at the east end of the Abbey, beyond the high altar. It is a masterpiece of architecture with its spectacular fan-vaulted roof. The late King and Queen lie in eternal repose in a vault beneath the marble tomb at the heart of the chapel. Indeed, there is much to be seen by time travellers, not least the graves of Anne of Cleves, who lies interred to the right of the sacrarium, close to the high altar, as well as the marble tombs of Mary I, Mary Queen of Scots, and Anne Boleyn's own daughter, Elizabeth. But my friends, this is a sacred site, and I must leave you here, for it would not be fitting to take you inside God's house. But now our journey here is over, we are ready to time travel once more, and I will meet you for the final time at our next Tudor location. It is the jewel in the crown of King Henry VIII's palaces, and that, of course, is Hampton Court. I will see you there, and until then, my friend, God give you good day.